What would you say if I told you that the Royal Navy historically ordered second-class battlecruisers? I mean, technically it's the British Empire, and technically it's the Royal Navies as in the broadest Royal Navies, but yes, there were second-class battlecruisers ordered. Now, why am I making this claim? Why am I saying this? Well, because in June 1910, when New Zealand and Australia are laid down, they are laid down, well, a month after Princess Royal has been laid down, and 7 months after HMS Lion have been laid down. In simple terms, the Royal Navies are building two 12-inch battlecruisers when they've already started the 13.5-inch battlecruiser line. They've already got 13.5-inch battleships about to be launched. HMS Orion will be launched in August 1910. So, June, July, August. So, the Royal Navy is quite literally building 12-inch gun battlecruisers when they're already building 13.5-inch ones. So, technically, especially when you look at the armour scheme and the capabilities put into these vessels, the Indefatigables, when they rank up against a Lion, cannot be described as first-class ships. So they are technically second-class battlecruisers. So today's video looks at why, as I normally do when I'm doing a what-if history, why the Indefatigables were chosen, what the reality was that they're building, what the facts were around it, and then after the shameless book plug, what happens if the Dominions go, why are you trying to sell us that when you're building that? Why are you advising us to go for that when you're building that? You know? That's the point. Why? Why would they want to have a second-class ship? Now, to be honest, HMS Australia is a gorgeous vessel. She's a very, very capable asset. And the whole reason behind their procurement is to head their anti-cruiser, their sea control squadrons. So realistically, you could say, compared to pretty much every other ship in the world at the time, she is a perfectly sensible procurement. However, if you realise other nations are already building battlecruisers, then surely you want something which can take out other battlecruisers, and the Royal Navy's vessel which can take a battlecruiser which can take out other battlecruisers, it starts when they start building 13.5-inch gun ships. That's their purpose. They're the battlecruisers which can also fight other battlecruisers. So why wouldn't Australia, especially, want such a ship? Let's be honest. At similar times, you have the Japanese looking at and ordering the Congos. You have all sorts of vessels being built up. You have the reality that there is going to be something that's going to succeed the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau in the German Asiatic squadrons, in their China squadron, basically. And there is a debate. When I did the live on this video, I said, well, I'm reckoning it's going to be a Monka. I reckon it could be Goban, it could be, sort of these sort of ships. And a lot of people are going, well, that's a major asset to send out there. And it is a major asset to send out there. But let's be honest, Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, the entire force was a major asset to send out there. And they were on a hiding to nothing. They were out there as a demonstration of German power and strength, which Germany couldn't support and couldn't sustain. They were a peacetime status symbol, not a wartime capability. They were out there for political reasons, not for operational ones. Not if you're looking at the major threat as being a war with Britain in Europe. There should be none of those ships should have been out in the Far East. Not a single one of them. And yet, they're over there. They are a waste of crew, a waste of personnel, a waste of money. Yet they're there. So to me, the odds are, if they're going to keep on doing this for the ego, then it's necessary to presume they're going to keep on doing it for the ego. And if you're a strategic planner for Australia, if you're a strategic planner for New Zealand, sure that's got to come into there. Now, usually, at this point, I start to get the cost discussion coming up. And people are going, well, these ships were a lot cheaper. They're not. The average cost of an Indefatigable is £1.5 million. The average cost for a line on Queen Mary is £2 million. Tiger was only 2.6. So yes, there is a difference in their pricing. There is. And you can sit there and go, well, that's a significant amount. But when you actually look at the costs, the real term costs of the ships, if you look at people like Parkes or Gillett puts Australia at being at £2 million. Parkes, one of those other lovely sources of costs in through history, puts the price of New Zealand at 1,770,000, I think it's 79,000 and a couple of £100, something, pounds. It's a huge amount, but also you think, and then you go, well, including armament and costs, the Lions, that's getting within 300 grand of a Lion. And yes, that's an expensive amount. Yes, that is a lot of money. But you're already spending a huge amount of money. This is the argument you have in modern times about how many close-in weapon systems or how many VLS cells you should have on your warship. You're already spending all that money to give it that much better capability to defend itself, that much better capability to project power for you, is not that much more. To give yourself something which is just that bit extra level of security doesn't really cost that much when you consider all you're already spending. And there are differences between the class, quite significant ones. For the Indefatigables, they are pretty much coal-powered with oil support going into their boilers. They are 25.8 knots, and they're capable of doing roughly 6,700 nautical miles at 10 knots. So they've got quite a good range on them. The Battlecruisers of the Lion class, in contrast, are capable of 27.5 knots. That's a hefty little upgrade. And they do 5,610 nautical miles at 10 knots. But that's a little bit of a drop down. But again, what are you buying? What is your capability? When you consider you are buying a flagship, you are buying a status asset. Both come with 8 guns. One has 13.5 inch, one has 12 inch. Both have 16 4-inch guns, they're secondaries. I was told the other day that, Dreadnoughts didn't have secondaries, and HMS Dreadnought. And I didn't really feel like responding in the comment that, have you checked how many 3-inch guns she had on her? The fact is, secondaries, as in an anti-torpedo boat armament, were carried from the get-go. It's only once you start getting the main guns being big enough that, frankly, engaging light cruisers becomes a costly operation with them, that you start going, oh, I'm going to need something which is a more decent secondary than that. It's one of the great myths. Basically, Dreadnought means uniform main battery, not just one gun. It's a fun bit of history. But when you consider also, with the Lions versus the Indefatigables, the armour differential, well, one of these ships is designed to hang out in a fight a bit longer. One of these ships is designed to engage its equivalents. One isn't. In pretty much every category of armour, they exceed the Indefatigables by almost 2 inches. There is a quantum difference going on. And that leads us to the build squadron. Look at who they're built by, when they're built, and how they were built. Invincible, Inflexible, Indomitable, all ordered 16th of March, 1905. They're built by Armstrong Whitworth, John Brown, and Fairfield. The engine builders are Yarrow, Parsons Turbines, and Babcock, Wilcox, Parsons Turbines, built by Babcock and Wilson. It's useful. Indefatigable, John Brown, Parsons Turbines. Lion, Yarrow, Parsons Turbines for their engines. Princess Royal, New Zealand, Australia. All Parsons turbines. John Brown again for Australia. Fairfield, Yarrow. There is no problem in terms of capacity. And honestly, the figures given for Australia are mostly dead on the £2 million mark. And when you look at the price, Lion and Princess Royal, about 86,500 and 89,000 more. You're spending £2 million for that ship. For an extra 90 grand, you could get a Lion. I'm sure there will be people who are below going, well, they couldn't afford it. It's 90 grand on £2 million already. The estimate for New Zealand, which I put together there, is, it's still within 310 grand of the most expensive of the Princess Royal, which is the most expensive of the Lions. Quite literally, you have the Indefatigable has been built. You have a 4 for the 12-inch gun ships. It actually makes more sense to be building the 4 Lions. It really does make more sense to be building 4 Lions, because then you have a nice squadron of them. Now, you could argue, well, they might make modifications to it. They probably will. They will probably be Lions which turn out closer to Queen Mary's. Because they'll probably go, ooh, we can make our free changes. And that's usually what the Royal Navy does. Between every single design evolution, they make roughly 3 changes. So they can monitor the progress and the upgrades and make sure everything's sort of keeping nicely in line. Now, the context of all this, the necessity of all this, is what do they want these ships to do? As said, they are looking at these ships as vessels. They're buying battle cruisers. The Indefatigables are battle cruisers. They're not first-class battle cruisers when you're building a Lion at the same time, but they are battle cruisers. They're buying them to provide them with a flagship and to provide them with the capability to deal with any threats that should reach them. That doesn't make sense in a scenario where the Germans are going to eventually replace Shameless now with something bigger, and when the Congos are going to be built. Because whilst Japan is an ally, you still want to have something which is roughly on parity with them. And you know the Congos are going to be built because you're in discussions with the Japanese about these things. You know this stuff is coming. Now, would I say a Lion is equivalent to a Congo? No, I'd say it's closer to a Tiger. But, on paper, 13.5-inch gun battlecruiser looks a far more equivalent with 14-inch gun battlecruiser than a 12-inch one, and that's usually enough for politicians. And also, there is the reality that, let's be honest, Tiger and the Congos are quite far down the battlecruiser one-word line. On the spectrum of battlecruiser 2 words, which you have the Invincibles on, which are basically cruisers armed with battleship-grade guns, to battlecruisers which are now armored and subdivided with the idea they're going to fight each other, to fast battleships which are armored and subdivided with the idea they're going to actually have to fight battleships at some point, and then battleships at the other end of the spectrum, final end of the spectrum, along this spectrum of increasing subdivision, armor, thickness, and coverage. It's not just the thickness of the armour, it's how much of the hull does it cover and how much subdivision supports it that makes the difference between whether you are a battle cruiser or a fast battleship. That's really important in that area. Politicians don't really look at those lines. They look at the top line, thing of what the guns are. So yes, this would have made sense. Now, of course, the difficult one is going to be New Zealand. The difficult one is New Zealand because That's the one which joins the Royal Navy because New Zealand has the money to really put towards the building of it, kind of like Malaya does with Queen Elizabeth class. They have the money towards, but they don't have the system set up to crew and run it and sustain it. And that's a hard one. But again, to be fair, when we start looking at them, the New Zealand has a peacetime complement of roughly 850. Roughly 850. And the Lion class has a peacetime complement of roughly 1,990. So yeah, there are more people required for the Lion class. But again, the Royal Navy is going to be providing a chunk of them, and okay, that's an extra couple of hundred people the Royal Navy has to find. In this period, that is not a lot for the Royal Navy to have to find. In terms of the Royal Navy's personnel budget in the period we're talking about, the pre-World War I period, a couple of hundred people is less than a rounding error. It really is on the budget. So, and they'll have them. They'll have those people anyway, more than likely, considering how they work through people. So it's not a problem. It's not an issue which I anticipate being an issue. What it does mean, though, is you have to start putting out infrastructure. You see, the thing is, 12-inch gunships, they become kind of common. 13.5-inch gunships did used to be part of the were a core part of the Royal Navy for quite a long time, but their shells and guns were very different than these 13.5-inch guns. So you're going to have to invest a bit in infrastructure support and sustain them in the Far East, in Australasia, etc. But again, this comes up as a problem, usually when discussing this, but the fact is they were having to invest in infrastructure and industry to sustain these vessels out there. So yes, it's going to cost a bit more money. Probably. Not that much more money because you're buying it and building it anyway in the first place. So you're basically going, instead of I wanting option A, I want option B. Again, we are talking about money which adds up. We are talking about expense. This is not going to be a cheap scenario. But if you're paying $2 million plus whatever you're paying for the infrastructure, which I think roughly at the time in terms of infrastructure Australia investment, Australia's putting in was roughly about another £1 million. There is debates on how it's valued up and because of the way it's allocated in government spending. Same with same New Zealand. They were putting in they were putting in money so New Zealand could come out and spend time out there. You're talking about adding on possibly, as said, about let's say it's $100,000 to get the ship and another $150,000 on the infrastructure spending. So you're spending $3 million. Okay, now you have to spend $3.25 million, and you've got a lot better ship and a lot better capability. And this is the important point to think about. Really important point to think about. You got something which is a better status symbol. Realistically, for Australia as well, that's going to be a bit of a status symbol. Having a 12-inch gunship, okay. But the 13.5-inch were the beginning of the first super dreadnoughts. I know we don't call them that these days. Those are referred to as the Queen Elizabeth class and 15-inch gunships onwards. But the 13.5-inch ships were considered the first generation of super dreadnoughts. That's what they're marketed as. And 13.5-inch guns were a status symbol. Now, again, this can worry some people because they go, well, hang on, were there problems with the 13.5-inch gun supply? At the point we're talking about where they would be ordering, again, go back to it and look at when they're making the order for these ships in August 1909, well, that means you've got the Orions already on order. You've already got the Orions, you've already got Lion and Princess Royal herself, so you've already got those ones on order. In terms of by the time they're laid down, well, the Indefatigables are laid down in June, as I've said, 1910. if you order them as 13.5-inch ships, you go from having 6 13.5-inch gun ships being laid down and under construction to having 8. Considering the infrastructure and industry being involved, as demonstrated by this list, that's not exactly going to stretch things, is it? This is one of the other points to consider. So why, if that's all the case, why did they go with the Indefatigables? Well, I think it's because they got stuck in the mantra of these are cruisers. These are a cruiser squadron. And the Indefatigables were the second generation of battle space cruiser. They are the second generation of cruisers which have battleship grade guns. They are the second grade of the definitely for trade protection, not really for anything else, cruiser of this type. And so they're, of course, what you're going to do, because they're what fit the formula, because we're doing trade protection. In contrast, these are ships of, well, the fleet. When I say this, when I look through the documents and I say this sort of thing, I often get into trouble because people go, well, no, these are smart, capable officers who are professionals. They understand what they're doing. Surely they wouldn't fall into such a trap. Surely there was a logical reason they were pursuing these ships as the option. And it is quite simple to me. They have made the case for commerce protection and commerce warfare. They have won the case for commerce warfare. The ship which fits in the slot of the commerce warfare battlecruiser is the Indefatigables. Yes, the Lions can do the job, but they are not just the commerce warfare, they are also fighting other battlecruisers. And I'm sorry, but we have this problem today in the modern world when we're doing procurement. We have this problem today. You think about it in terms of people going shopping. Okay? Let's say you're going to get milk. You're going to go and buy milk. And in the UK, semi-skimmed are the green bottles. Now, I usually go and buy milk for revision centres when I'm running them for helping run them for a A-level GCSE revision course centre. It's something I've been doing for many years. And when I'm buying milk for the staff room, for the tutors to drink their tea and coffees, they always like semi-skimmed milk. So you go hunting for semi-skimmed milk. You need roughly 4 pints for the day. I have walked in and I have spotted other course directors shopping in a similar place than I am, because there's one supermarket between about 3 different centres, and so we usually end up in the same thing at roughly the same times because of the way the schedule works out. And they'd be going, I can't find the 4 pints of semi-skimmed milk. Okay. That's fine. What's the other options? Well, I can't find the 4 pints of semi-skimmed milk. There's 2 pinters there. There's a 4 pint of skimmed milk, and there's pasteurised milk. I'm grabbing the skimmed milk because that'll fit easiest in the fridge. It does the job. Okay, it's not as nice as semi-skimmed, but it does the job. It's milk for their tea and coffee. I don't drink tea and coffee. I'm just providing it. This is what can happen over milk. The same thing can happen over ship procurement. Again, think about it in terms of the UK, which is a classic example of this. With the Type 45s, we're procuring air defence warships. The Mark 41 VLS, which they were fitted for but not with, they weren't built with because, well, it wasn't necessary for their air defence mission. It was a added extra. So you don't want a general purpose warship. You don't want something which has the ability to carry Tomahawks, ASROCs, SM-3 should you wish to have an anti-ballistic missile theatre air defense capability which was actually available at the time, rather than the Astor 45 which turned into the Aquila, I think it is, system? No, we want an air defense destroyer. These are actually modern debates we have, so I can very easily see a discussion going, oh yes, they want a commerce protection battlecruiser. That's an Indefatigable. So even though you are literally designing, building everything on the Lions, even though the Lions are not only ordered beforehand, in the case of Lion herself, she's laid down November 1909. Laid down November 1909. New Zealand and Australia are ordered in August 1909. Ordered in August 1909. September, October, November. That is how mature you have to design for the Lion class. That is how viable you have to design for the Lion class. And yet, you are ordering and will not lay down till June the following year to Indefatigables. They're not bad ships. They're just not the ships you really need, I would argue. They are the ships which fit a mould. It's always slightly strange when you talk about these ships because they have actually quite a good career. They're quite blessed ships. Especially New Zealand is a very lucky ship. And they get involved in some very interesting actions. But I spend a lot of my time when I'm looking at them going, but you shouldn't have been built. Because by all logic, if anyone had been sitting outside the process going, why are we building these ships when we're building these at the same time? Why are we building these 12-inch gun ships and not this? Why, for the pretty much the same money, are we giving them the 12-inch gun ships, which are slower and less well armoured and less capable than these ships which we're building? I honestly wonder if you get them. And there were articles and discussions at the time, people going, why are we getting these ships? And then people going, we are getting them, they are commerce protection, they are going to be our great ships. And you honestly think that no one was sitting there going, huh? They got so trapped in the line of commerce protection of, we are building a trade protection cruiser squadron, and this is going to be the flagship of our trade protection cruiser squadron, because it is the largest cruiser. Then no one's sitting there going, but for not much more money, we get something which is more useful. And that's usually the point at which you go, okay, so let's say if they're 12-inch gunships and all these things, they must have been able to be completed more quickly, okay? They must have been able to be put into service far more quickly. Well, New Zealand takes from June 1910, the 20th of June, to November 1912 to be completed. Let's give New Zealand as the example. Australia is June 1910 to June 1913, so she's 3 years. Already in a bit of trouble, but we'll leave that to one side. June 1910 to November 1912. Okay? So that's 2 years and 5 months, roughly. The Lion class. November 1909 for Lion is completed by May 1912. She's fairly short of 3 years. She's 2 years, 5 months. Princess Royal, May 1910 to November 1912. Well, she is 2 years and, what should we say, 2 years, 6 months? There's not much differential going on there on timeline, is there? And in the case of Australia, well, I hate to be a bit of a party pooper, but yeah, Princess Royal is laid down in May 1910. I will admit she's laid down about a month earlier, but she's completed in November 1912, and Australia's June 1913. So she's manages to take 6 months less and be completed 7 months earlier. And why is this? Well, I wouldn't say there are exact problems with their construction, because there aren't. But one of the things you have to realise when these ships are being built is that the priority is going to the 13.5-inch ships and the specs for them. And the specs for the Lions versus the Orions and the other 13.5-inch ships are far closer in terms of production than the 12-inch gun ships going through the production line. So which do you think gets priority? Which gets the focus? There are other small reasons, but basically these things build up. The 13.5-inch ships are the important ones. They're where the future lies. Everyone knows that. And this is the really sad thing for Australia and New Zealand as they're being built, is very quickly they are becoming they're big assets for Australia and New Zealand. But in the scheme of things, everyone's already looking at them and going, we're past them. They're still going to be status symbols, but they're not going to be the status symbols. And that's a bit of a letdown. They're good ships, but yeah. So, with that being said, Shameless book plug. So this is a fun Shameless book plug to build in, because, as you know, this basically means I'm going to get into the what if. And what if they did go with the Lions rather than the Indefatigables after this? But this is also one of those fun videos for me to do, because I did it in the year of leadership, now coming out in the year of destroyers. And it's basically a procurement video. It's this is what happens when you start thinking about your procurement and go, what are we really buying? Because here is the thing, there is an argument to buying Indefatigables. There really is. That is, if you are building 8 to 10 of them. When you're building large numbers of ships, whereby the little differences in cost can build up into an whole extra ship, it matters. If you think about it from this point of view, which is better? If you're saying a Lion costs you, let's say that cost Britain, etc., and various things to get the Indefatigable originally, about 1.6 million. And there's debates on the cost. I know I put 1.5 million up at the beginning. That's often the considered cost, but there are other things added on beyond the ship, so let's say 1.6 million. And yeah, Lion and Queen Mary, or Princess Royal, isn't it? It's Princess Royal, yeah. Queen Mary's the next one. Come in at 2,100,000. Okay. So at a certain point, I can buy roughly 3 Lions of 4 Indefatigables. At that point, probably the 3 Lions are best. But at another point, it starts to build up. If I get 6 Lions, is that really better than 8 Indefatigables? Is 12 better than 16? In terms of what I need them for. But here's the disturbing fact when you're dealing with capital ships. You're not buying that many. You're not. The Royal Navy as a whole's buying a lot, but they're buying them at a pace of roughly 4 or something a year. They occasionally go a little bit higher than that when they want to stretch out their infrastructure and really show off, but yeah, they keep to roughly 4 battleships and a couple of battlecruisers, or 1 or 2 battlecruisers a year. That's what they roughly keep to every year. Roughly 6 ships going through the production line. And it keeps them going, keeps their fleet up to the size they need. we often have this discussion because we talk about the Japanese. But the Japanese, when they are building their ships, especially when they're ordering them from the UK at a time, the UK is buying about 8 to 10 ships on the pre-dreadnought types in a class. And that'd be ordered over a couple of years. The Japanese are buying about 2 ships. And the Japanese very quickly realise that if I'm going to buy 2 ships and they're buying 10 ships, I will pay for the premium capability. Because that's valuable for me. That makes my ships individually more capable. Yes, as an aggregate, I'm still going to lose, because they're going to turn up with 4 times as many. But they have to turn up with more ships. I'm making their life more difficult. They don't know they can guarantee a win in a one-on-one fight. And it's the same once we get to these ships. These are the ships which you're building as your flagships, which are going to be the centerpieces. If any ship is going to end up in a critical one-on-one fight with a peer, it's probably going to be them, because let's be honest, any of your other ships, cruisers, etc., which end up in a one-on-one fight which they lose, you've got the flagship to come in and go, hello, you beat up my little friend. I'm here. The ships you can't afford, really, to be second class in any way, shape or form are the flagships. Because they're the ultimate guarantor. Especially for Australia. New Zealand, well, they're basically buying a ship for the Royal Navy to run. That's going to be run in support of them and support their force, their position, but it's basically for the Royal Navy to run. But for Australia, there's a different calculation going on. And whatever Australia goes with, New Zealand pretty much has to, because the infrastructure that their ship's going to depend on is going to largely be Australian infrastructure. Because they are pretty much, whilst they are separate, in terms of Royal Navy infrastructure terms in this period, they are pretty much treated as one whole, because of the infrastructure limitations down in Australasia. Oh, there you go. Now, please do like, share and subscribe if you like the channel. It already helps it grow, and this is my book. There are more coming, but this is what's available at the moment. Now, for the build timeline, didn't really have to change anything. It's just these become Lions. Which makes sense, because they've got 4 12-inch gunships. 4 13.5-inch gunships. You got Queen Mary and Tiger coming along afterwards. But that becomes a sort of really interesting point of what happens to them. You see, my theory is New Zealand and Australia will be built as upgraded, upgraded Lions. They'd be slightly along the way to possibly Queen Mary. Which means Queen Mary might end up closer to Tiger. And Tiger might end up closer to, who knows? Tiger is a big leap in expense. She jumps up to 2.6 million. As I've discussed before, Tiger is the point at which it starts to make sense to build some 9.2-inch cruisers. It really does. It starts to make sense to build some large, some heavy cruisers, if you want to call them that. Something to fit between the light cruisers which are being built, or the Town class and the various successors to them, and the Battlecruisers. You start to see a gap opening up because the expense has grown that large. In difference in pricing and cost. Because originally, when you talk about the Invincibles, they are roughly 1.8 million. And if you look at the costs of a large armoured cruiser, it's pretty much the same. Okay, yes, there is some differences in cost, but once you add in the necessary of maintaining different infrastructure and different supports, honestly, it's not that different. Once you're getting onto the Lions, and I would argue even the Indefatigables, considering their prices, you're getting to a level at which, okay, this is now no longer in the same ballpark. It's in the same postcode, but not the same ballpark. Once you get to Tiger, it's moved postcode. They are now possibly in the postcode next door to you, but they're not in your postcode anymore. And that's the kind of area which has a lot of private roads. Very nice private roads, beautifully maintained, and they all have gardeners, and they all have the same sort of high-end cars in black for some reason on their drive. You're never quite sure, but they're sort of like that. So, yeah, there's a difference going on. Now, this is not going to be built in a fishbowl. This is not going to happen on its own completely. Other people are going to be impacted on it, but we're first going to talk about what this impact this has on the British. You're improving the quality of the build structure. You're going to have the Lions and the Lions Batch 2s, basically. You're also going to have, for this point probably, a slightly larger investment by Australia and New Zealand, but also a status investment. They have gone for the very best you can build. And let's be honest, the 13.5-inch battlecruisers aren't going to be topped till, in terms of Royal Navy terms, until there is appearance of renown or a pulse. And as I've argued before, and will continue to argue, probably till I'm blue in the face, if you're looking for the battlecruiser which is closest to a fast battleship that the British ever build, it's Tiger. Not Hood. Certainly not renown and pulse. If you look at her density of her construction, the subdivision, the armour coverage, everything she's got going on, this is the one closest to a battlecruiser. The closest to a fast battleship, I mean. And it's the thing which I always find funny is people are prepared to argue Hood's a fast battleship, but they won't argue Tiger is. And yet Tiger is far closer once you look at her density, her hull subdivision, her armour coverage, than Hood is. Far, far closer. And that's another reason for the changing price. At that point, you've got the Royal Navy approaching the fast battleship basically from two different directions. The Queen Elizabeth class and Tiger. That's their approaching at the point. So, again, when you're looking at this, you're going, oh, well that's quite a decent group. This is something different. This is something different. What's the German response going to be? Because that's going to be the first thing. Now, quick aside before we get into the German response. Traditionally on my channel when there's a live, sometimes people put PT in the chat, and that's for poodle treat, and that's for biscuits which were this size. Now, the biscuits that have arrived, when we order them, were this size. Because they've run out of these. So, we're going to do a cumulative thing on the poodle treats, right? So now that if there's going to have to be enough of them to get. So using that as a demonstration aid. So basically to stop him getting fat, because there's a bit of a difference in size between the two. Anyway, to the German response, and yeah, if there was a break in the video, that's because I went out to get the poodle. Shameless is ordered in March 1910, commissioned in May 1913, and this time there'll be at least 3 of the now 13.5-inch Lions in the service. That's a difference. That is a difference. The Flingers aren't ordered till 1912. And the Flinger herself, as I put up there, commissions before HMS Tiger. But in this scenario, Tiger would be the 6th 13.5-inch gun, 28-knot battlecruiser, to enter service with the Royal Navy. The question becomes, what do the Germans do? There's a limit to what they can do. If they push their budget too much, they're going to end up in an argument with the army. And that's historically what happens. That's how the Royal Navy wins the naval race. They basically make dreadnoughts expensive enough with the Queen Elizabeth class that the Germans can't compete. And that's why the Bardens are closer to really the R class in terms of performance and capabilities, and in terms of what they're actually, response to. It's the same with battle cruisers. The Germans will have plans, they'll want to compete, but this is a very different scenario than they historically are facing. Historically, Shameless comes out and there's a couple of Lions coming along. Now there's 3. And there's another one on its way, and by the time you get to the Flinger, there'll be 5 in service. And they're fast. And they're capable. And that's a problem, because for the Germans, their battlecruisers peaked in terms of speed with Von der Tann, and they've been getting slower ever since. They are down to realistically 26.5 knots fully loaded. They often test better in trials when they don't have ammunition aboard. They're travelling light in terms of fuel and various other things. But in terms of their real life performance, it's usually closer to 26.5 knots. And that's if everything's well conditioned and going right. One of the things you realise very quickly in terms of the design strategy, the German ships are probably closer down the line to fast battleships in terms of the spectrum than the British ones. But that means that their speed is never as much of an advantage over the fastest British battleships as it could have been. And it also means that usually the British ships can, to an extent, usually, especially if they're prepared to damage their turbines, to an extent, can reel them in. Now, this doesn't mean necessarily, go back to the Invincibles, etc. The coal-fired ones are a different one to the oil-fired ones, but again, this is a scenario we're dealing with. The Lions, the extra complications, especially, is going to be they increase the use of oil. They're not completely oil-fired, but they are increased use of oil. Will have required infrastructure improvements, for which were already underway as well. This is the thing, oil's storage and systems are already underway in Australia and New Zealand. So again, that isn't really a problem. But the point is, around the world, the British now have a lot of 13.5-inch gun ships, and the Germans are looking at their capabilities. And their capabilities are Von der Tann, the 2 Moltkes, and Seydlitz. My suspicion would be that they would try and order a second Seydlitz. That's probably the most cost-effective route to go. And that gives them a fairly decent ship. Why not go straight to the Flinger? Because I don't think they have the resources to make that jump at this point. And when I say resources, I don't mean knowledge, I don't mean infrastructure, I mean funding. I literally mean funding. And even if they do jump to second Seydlitz, that's going to have an impact on other things they're building. They already have got a very small cruiser arm, and that's getting virtually no investment at this point. That probably will get no investment if they do a second Seydlitz. And there's also going to be probably a knock-on impact in their torpedo button. They are probably also not going to get as much funding, because they're not going to get much more money out of central government than they're getting. Because the problem for them is always, they can get a decent budget, but the moment their budget starts to become large enough that there's actually a debate between whether you're funding the army or the navy, the Kaiserliche Marine lose. They lose that every single time. There is virtually no scenario where the Kaiserliche Marine wins a funding battle with the army. So if they do go a second Seydlitz, that's the most cost-effective response they can do, but they're still going to come at the cost of cutting things they're building. So they have an even less balanced fleet than needed historically. And if you want to understand what I mean by that, please go watch the video I've got on my channel called Building the Fleet of Jutland, which literally looks at the fleets which are there. And goes, basically it's a point-by-point analysis of the German fleet is incredibly unbalanced as a force structure. It makes what they achieve even more amazing, but as a force structure, they have literally been robbing Peter to play Paul, to use that old phrase. They have been robbing Peter to play Paul, and they have done it repeatedly, time and time again. Now, I would also add there is another issue going on. Because with these ships, especially Australia, but probably New Zealand as well, deployed out to the Far East, for the Germans, they're going to be sitting there looking at, say, at Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, and they're going to be going, hang on, we're completely outclassed here. The British can afford to. Let's be honest. They can afford to deploy those ships out to the Far East. That's where they're supposed to be going anyway. The British have the Free Invincibles, they have Indefatigable, they have Lion, they have Princess Royal. They have these ships already sitting in the European theatre, primarily of operations. You know, they're sitting in the Mediterranean, that some of them are wandering down there, some of them are wandering around the UK, some of them are wandering around various points of the Atlantic, but they're sitting in. They can afford to have these ships over there. Yes, they're very powerful assets to have over in the Far East, but that's also a symbol of British power in a way, and it also, and more importantly, it means they don't have to have anything else out there. They can actually save money in terms of their force deployments because they've got such powerful units out there in terms of the wider, you know, Empire force structure. This is going to be a problem because you have the Kaiser. Now, why is that a problem? Because this is a man who is already, as said, put ships out there for status. To show Germany is a global power. This is a man who later on will make sure that there is a, you know, things like the Goeben are sitting in the Mediterranean, when frankly should probably have been withdrawn. The moment you start considering getting involved in a conflict which could lead to other people getting involved, and I know he for some reason really believed the British would not get involved in a war. Because why would the British get involved in a war? They've only been de facto allied, and we've only been building a fleet against them, and you know they've only been upset with us for the last decade and a half at our policies. They're not going to get involved in a war. We haven't been causing them trouble left, right, and centre, and they haven't been returning the favour. No, we're not going to get involved in a war. So he has Goeben sitting in the Mediterranean, historically, with Breslau. Well, in this scenario, I could honestly see there being another one of those ships, maybe even Moltke, out in the Far East. He's got to have something out there for status. And historically, that's what it probably would be Moltke and Goeben who would have been eventually, when probably whatever the equivalent of comes in after the Flingers, the Mackinsons, whatever, you know, happens with them afterwards, came in, they probably would have replaced Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, because those ships were to be replaced. They weren't to be out there forever, and Germany wanted to keep its presence out there forever, so at that point, so yes, they would have been replaced, but do they get replaced earlier? Do you get something sitting out there? Do you get Moltke deployed out to the Far East? I'd hope not. I really would hope not, but it depends. If they're ordering a second Seydlitz, then potentially Moltke gets ordered out there. But that's not good, because to my mind that means you are automatically writing off Goeben and Moltke for any World War I scenario. Because one of them's going to be wandering around the Mediterranean, and one of them's going to be out in the Far East. Because they are the ships they do send out for these things. And that's not good for Germany. Yes, they have an extra Seydlitz, but that means, as useful as an extra Seydlitz is, that still means that their battlecruiser force is basically the Flinger, and 2 Seydlitz, and Von der Tann at the beginning of World War, actually at home and able to be used as that battlecruiser force, as their first scouting group in World War I. That's a good group. But it means they've just lost a lot of skilled people and a lot of capability abroad, where they couldn't do much help. This is going to be the first phase of the question of, I don't want you to think about whether you would deploy, because I'm hoping everyone here listening to this video, all of them would be thinking, no, I wouldn't deploy a battlecruiser to the far... I wouldn't even deploy Shameless and Gneisenau to the Far East. I can understand why, okay, it's status and all these things, but I certainly wouldn't. But I think if Australia's got one, and New Zealand's this one operating up there, and Japan's buying the Congos and getting the Congos going through and all that stuff, I honestly believe that the Kaiser's going to insist on it. He's going to insist on something like that for status. And Lord help me, there's part of me which thinks it might actually be the Sadelets rather than the Moltke, purely for the status of it. I'm really interested. This is the first part of today's question, which I end the videos with. But, yeah. Do you think the Kaiser, A, is not able to be persuaded not to deploy something? Because I think he's going to, but I'd like to hear your opinions if you think he wouldn't. But let's be honest. The Kaiser is pretty obsessed with status and image. We've all seen his uniforms. We've all seen the things he does. He's a product of his time. This is not unusual for his time. I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad part of him, but it is a product of his time. It's what he's focused on. I think he wants something out there. Do you think he gets the Sadelets, or does he compromise on one of the Moltkes? On Moltke herself, perhaps? And if so, what would you do? What kind of conditions would you try and put in for it? I think the problem for the Germans is the moment they have a battlecruiser out there, they turn their force from being something which the British are fairly confident dealing with anything into something the British are actively hunting with a battlecruiser force. And I would say actually having something like Goeben and Moltke out there would be a double-edged sword, because it would mean that probably British war plans would be something like, the two battlecruisers in Australasia, HMAS Australia and HMS New Zealand, will join up together and will track this force down and will engage with all the cruisers and other forces they can have available. At which point there'll be an interesting conversation of, so how's that cat and mouse going to go, Von Spey? And Von Spey's probably going to do his best. He's going to be pretty good. He's always a pretty good admiral, but yeah, that's not a good scenario. There's also differences for the British in terms of what they're probably getting. Now, why is this happening? Because, as I said, Australia and New Zealand would probably be slightly evolved lions, which would push on also Queen Mary, which would make her probably closer to Tiger. And this has consequences. In that, I think in this scenario, it's very likely HMS Tiger ends up being the first ship ordered with 15-inch guns. Bear with me, and I'll explain. So, Tiger is laid down in June 1912. They've taken the decision to develop the 15-inch 42 in January 1912. Tiger is built with quite large barbettes anyway. She's actually, it's not going to be easy, but it's not also going to be complicated. It's going to be fiddly, but not a major issue to actually make those guns 15-inch 42s rather than 13.5-inch. And the thing is, historically, the 15-inch 42 is test fired in May 1914, and historically, Queen Elizabeth commissions on 22nd of December 1914, 2 months after Tiger commissions. 2 months. So there is a lot of overlap here. Now, what does that mean if Tiger is the first 15-inch ship to commission? Well, that's a status jump for starters. That means you're not going to be able to keep BT offer as his flagship to save your life. But it also means that she is going to be probably slightly longer and slightly up armored in comparison to historically. And at that point, The line between her and a fast battleship becomes very interesting, especially if she's capable of 28 plus knots. Tiger becomes an incredibly lethal asset with 15-inch 42s, especially its design fitted with them. And it fits because the Royal Navy will have still built before her. Well, no, historically, before they got to her, she is their fourth 13.5-inch gun ship. But in this scenario, she'd have been their sixth. I don't think they build a sixth 13.5-inch gunship. I think they build a sixth ship and it's a 15-inch gunship. And I think that is going to have an impact on everyone. Because, especially with a battlecruiser, even though it's going to be maybe a couple months service entrance earlier than the Queen Elizabeth class, if the British suddenly switch that the gun upgrade comes in first with a battlecruiser rather than a battleship, that is going to have an impact around the world. Everyone's going to know the Queen Elizabeth's coming. Everyone's going to know they're going to be faster and more powerful and that thing's coming. The British are already marketing that one up at the wazoo. But Tiger as well. And Tiger coming in first, that is going to have a very, very interesting impact. I'd say that's going to have an impact for the Americans because they're suddenly going to look at their battle line and go, are we doing the right thing with the speed we're doing? Because if the British have that much of a speed advantage over us, a speed advantage of 7 knots allows you to dictate not only the timing of the engagement, but the range of the engagement. You see, with a 3-knot advantage, you can dictate either the timing or the speed or the range of the engagement. You can't really dictate both. Because once you're into engagement range, you either maintain engagement range, you don't have enough speed to really withdraw decisively, and then be able to come back when you choose. You can either withdraw, but you're not good enough for speed advantage. You can literally just zoom away and again come back when you wish, basically, from a different angle. 7 knots is that advantage. 7 knots does allow you to do that. Okay, not as amazing as 20 knots would, but 7 knots is enough. And that would be a really scary asset. This is actually possibly the scariest for the world consequence of New Zealand and Australia being built as 13.5-inch gunships. Tiger is probably a 15-inch 42 ship. And Tiger more than likely gets the world looking. Now, the thing is, historically, she comes into the service just as war is breaking out. She commissions just as war is breaking out. And that means some of her effect is going to be diluted, but the fact is, even when she's under construction, that's going to be having an impact. People are going to be looking at what they're building. People are going to be looking at why they're building that, how they're building that. I think, potentially, also, you have another consequence in this scenario. Because you've now built 2 and 2. There is also a very real scenario here. And you have to consider, it was considered, if she's being built with 15-inch guns, I think Tiger gets ordered a sister. I know there are some very interesting books, and I've got them. One book which I've read, which is by a German author, which claims Tiger did have a sister ordered. She didn't. Leopard does not exist outside anyone in reality. However, when I say she doesn't exist in reality, in that I don't think she never got a name, and it was always a case of, are we ordering 1 or 2? So it's decided rather early. But if she's going to get 15-inch 42s, you order 2. And that has a very big impact, because now you've got the Queen Elizabeth coming in, those 5 ships. You've got the 8 R's, and you've got these 2 15-inch gun battle cruisers. Here's the question. Do you still get the renowns? If you've got Tigers with 15-inch guns, 15-42s, do you need the renowns? Is there any justification for the renowns for Fisher doing? I think Fisher still might. Still might want to cancel 3 R's to get 2 renowns. Still might want to, but also Denny's got to make them live up to this. 8 15-inch guns, 28 plus knots. Okay, he's going to go, well, you know, I can make this for 33 knots with 6 guns. Is that really enough of a selling point? It's going to be an interesting thing to see how it plays out. It's going to have an impact on the British construction. I do think... really do believe that it would be a 15-inch 42 gun for Tiger. Because the British were looking to make that jump, and she fits in the timeline just as well as the Queen Elizabeth do. And in some ways, if you make the jump in her, because of the way the Royal Navy likes to work, where they don't like to make multiple jumps to the same ship, she would be just about early enough that you can make a slightly different jumps in the Queen Elizabeth class. Say they still have 15-inch 42s, but they might actually try and push their speed up higher. They might try and push their boilers and everything up higher. Might do. The thing is, the gun jump would already have been in place. You'd also have the scenario that you'd have an 8 15-inch 42 gun battle cruiser and an 8 15-inch gun 42 battleship. Eight 15-inch 42s gun, battleship. It's gonna be interesting how that would impact things. I can see very clearly the Royal Navy doing it and building it. There is no hard and fast rule in the Royal Navy that battlecruisers have to have less guns than battleships. There is nothing like that. It's just the way they usually do it is they're designing the battlecruisers by literally taking out a gun turret, adding in extra boilers, and stripping off armor. That is the Royal Navy's methodology of battlecruiser construction. So that's just their methodology. There's no rule they have to have less guns. After all, there are the admirals. They have 8 guns as well. So, yeah. And with 2 of them, that is going to be a problem. Because the Royal Navy can build 2 Tigers, especially 2 15-inch gun Tigers, without really stretching themselves. Again, I take you back to this lovely description. Armstrong, John Brown, Fairfield, Devonport, Palmer's, they're just some of the yards which are capable of constructing. One of the weirdest things to get, usually to explain to students, and I know I've said this on the channel all the time, several times, but I'm going to say it again. One of the weirdest things to get around people's heads is that the point at which the Royal Navy is maxing out in terms of we're building ships to win the naval race. There are shipyards which can build battleships and battlecruisers, which are large enough in the UK to build, going bust because the Royal Navy is not placing enough orders. The Royal Navy is building enough to win the race. They're not maxing out their infrastructure and certainly not maxing out their credit cards. And there is capacity. So you could have had, in this timeline, a second Sailors. and a second Tiger if the Tigers are 15-inch gun ships. Because, again, the reason I say you'd build 15, they'd be 2 if you're making them 15-inch guns, is because then you're changing something enough, which means you're going to have to start thinking about retention capability. With 13.5-inch 13.5-inch guns, she is another of the 13.5-inch gun ships. With 15-inch guns, she's the 15-inch gun ship. You need another one. And that's how the British literally work with alliance. They decide on 2 originally, quite simply because we're making this jump. We're usually ordering them. We've been ordering them in 3s and 1s, and the Indefatigables have been ordered as a 1, basically as a test bed. Yeah, we're ordering up. Well, it was considered they were considering ordering another 1 or 2, and they basically decided 13.5-inch guns. We'll order a second one, so that we have a capability, not a availability. Now, why have I put the Battle of Dogger Bank up here? Because, honestly, it's the battle you can most predict the likelihood of. Why am I saying that? Well, I don't think Shameless is deployed to the Far East. I'm not going to say that. But Moltke might well be. So basically, Moltke, Goeben, definitely not here. Shameless and sister, 26.5 knots. The Flinger, 26.5 knots. But Blucher, 25.4 knots. The Battle of Dogger Bank in 1915. Now, this battle is one of the few you can point to and go, really has to happen in World War I. It takes place at the end of January, and it's basically caused by both their doctrines, and it's going to happen because of their doctrines. That's the reality of it. It's a fairly straight-up fight. The Germans have brought the Blucher with them to try and make up their numbers, and that's a problem, because that ship, she can do 24, and, well, 25.4 knots if everything's going well, 24.8 knots most of the time, but we'll go with 25.4 knots. Now, you're not going to be able to change BT in the staff communication issues, but if you have a couple of Tigers in service, you probably have both Lions still there, so Lion and Princess Royal. You might well have New Zealand there with her 13.5-inch guns. She was there historically with her 12-inch guns. The question is, do you have Indomitable there? Do you have Indomitable? Well, you see, in this scenario, you have got Australia, New Zealand, Princess Royal, Tiger, Queen Mary, all with 13.5-inch guns. Lion and, let's call it Leopard to be nice to that German historian, but with 15-inch guns to draw from. That's an extra battlecruiser than you did have historically. Now, probably some of those ships were involved in various operations to deal with the force out in the Far East. So, let's cross out Australia. She was probably off doing that, and she might have been damaged, but she also might well have, could well have, especially if it was against a Moltke or Goeben. Let's be honest, they don't stand much chance against an improved Lion. They don't, one-on-one in that kind of fight. They have good guns, but they are the first generation German battlecruisers against what is a second generation British battlecruiser. So, yeah. The odds are, if you do have Indomitable there, she's an extra ship. And yes, she's a slower vessel. She's going to be limiting your force speed, but you can perhaps ignore her or leave her behind. You are more likely going to have about 4 of the 13.5, well, 3 to 4 of the 13.5-inch gunships there, and at least 1 of the 15-inch gunships. You could have both 15-inch gunships there. You could have both. And 3 of the 13.5-inch. All able to do roughly 28 knots. 27.5 knots to 20, doing exactly 28 knots.
The real difference this will bring to the Battle of Dogger Bank is a 2.5 knot speed advantage. Okay, it's 1.5 knot versus the Flingers and the Sailors, but Blue Cruiser is again going to slow them down. That's going to give BT more time for engagement. You're not going to be able to correct his command issues. You can't correct his command issues. But it will mean you'll have a lot more firepower. And that could have a massive impact on the war. Because there are ships which get hit by 12-inch shells from Indomitable New Zealand that are able to shake them off, that are able to, in some ways, tank some of them, that they wouldn't be able to tank the 15-inch or 13.5-inch shells. There's also the very real engagement power of the 15-inch guns. As in terms of learning lessons of the British shells and their equivalent and their capabilities, this battle could be really useful for the British. Historically, the Germans lose Blucher. I would not be surprised in a scenario where they find themselves facing, let's say, again, let's be nice to them and go 4 13.5-inch gunships and one 15-inch 42, 15-inch 42 gunship. Let's be nice and say that they probably lose, historically, by battle damage after this battle. It would be sailors. And if they hadn't found the issues with the magazines and ammunition handling practices, they wouldn't have been fixed before you had the Battle of Jutland on the German side. The Germans would have still been in as just as bad a scenario as the British Battlecruiser fleet. Battlecruiser squadron, then later becomes the fleet after this battle. It's also interesting that the Germans immediately start hunting for spies after this battle and don't realise it's their own communication systems, but we'll leave that to one side. The reality is also anything which is a more successful victory at Dogger Bank just adds to the luster of BT. And that's a problem for the British, really. That is a problem. But why can we talk about this battle being different because of the changing ships in it? It's the speed and pace of the battle. The engagement time is going to be longer. The firepower rating in is going to be just that much more heavier. I think myself, Indomitable is left with the second forces which are following up the rest of the battlecruisers. I think they leave her with them because she's just not fast enough to keep up with them, and that allows them to race ahead. So you have probably a fast group and a slow group, and that could have a really interesting impact on the battle in that BT trying to coordinate the two could order the fast group to follow on the slow group. It could actually, by trying to coordinate the two, could order the slow group to form up on him and the fast group to carry on and chase and actually give out the right signals. Because he's not trying to do something smart with one force, he's trying to do something smart with split force. That could actually be better. Unlikely, but better. If you have two 15-inch 42 battlecruisers there, like Tiger, that's not good. There's a reason why the Germans were very hopeful they'd sunk her at Dogger Bank. They hadn't, but they were very hopeful they had, because she was considered such a threat. She was considered an apex predator. Add in two of those blasting into the German line, and there is a problem for them. In the worst case scenario, the British could have two of their 15-inch 42 ships there with like Tiger, 4 13.5-inch gunships, and then you have 6 running it. And realistically, the reason the Germans won't have built more to counter this is because of that funding battle. They might have gotten extra satellites, but if they have, then the cruiser force, which is essential to this, and some of the destroyers, which are essential to this, in terms of providing the smoke for them to get away, might not be there. And if they don't have enough destroyers with them, or if they have the older, slightly slower destroyers with them, well, rather torpedo boats. Stora is realistically something the Germans, they are limited at. They build more fleet torpedo boats than they do destroyers. They're built around their torpedoes much more than their guns. And that's something which fewer numbers is going to cause to have an amplified effect on them, on their force. Basically, they could have another Seydlitz there instead of Moltke. And that's going to help them. That's going to be an improvement. But the cost to the rest of the force there is probably going to more than equal out their force strength, whereas the British increase is probably going to increase the British force strength. And as land battles show, the same with naval battles, having enough artillery can compensate for disadvantages of leadership. The firepower does have an impact. So let's go to summary.
Now, one of the things I try and do in alternate histories is I try and give both sides of the scenario. I try and work it through and show you the thought process and show you how, you bring in all the evidence, but also how you look at it in terms of it's not going to be happening in a goldfish bowl. It's going to be interacting with everything else. Things like Dogger Bank are quite easy to predict because of the doctrine and the fact that the doctrine operations, this is what happens, this is what results. It's a likely scenario. But Battle of Jutland, well, that's going to be an interesting, different scenario. I don't know what happens there in this scenario. Because what have they kept building the R-class battleships? Did the RN have even more of those 15-inch gunships coming into service? Or did they change them to Renown and Repulse as historically? In which case, how's that had an impact? Did the Battle of Dogger Bank, it could. We talked about how it's going to probably cost Seydlitz, considering the damage he suffered, but quite simply, if those ships do carry on, if they did form into two groups, and BT did manage to send the second group on to chase the Germans, there's a very real scenario where a couple of 15-inch gun ships and their 3 or 4 13.5-inch gun ships in terms of battlecruisers pummel their German counterparts a long time before they reach the safety of Germany, and the Germans lose all those ships. If they didn't just lose Blucher, they lost Seydlitz. They lost Seydlitz's sister, and they lost, De Flinger in this scenario. That's going to change how they think about a fleet action, because they've lost those ships. Again, if you go look at the Battle of Jutland video, one of the things that's apparent when you start looking at it is that the British take as many battleships with them, dreadnought battleships, as the Germans bring dreadnought battleships, battle cruisers, and pre-dreadnoughts, aka Royal Sovereign-style battleships. Combine those three groups together, the British still have more dreadnoughts at the Battle of Jutland than they do. Before you add in battlecruiser and everything, that is not something which works in their favour. If they lose enough ships at the Battle of Dogger Bank, then suddenly there are problems in their force analysis. Are they going to do something? Or are they going to stay back? Are they going to move into a fleet and being style earlier in the war? Is there going to be no Battle of Jutland? Is the British fleet going to be spending the entire period of World War I frustratedly waiting for the Germans to come out when they don't come out? And think of the narrative that changes history, but also think of what also that could change history in terms of the British spend an extra year hunting for a way to make them come out. Because if they get from intelligence they're not coming out again from 1915 onwards, then all those efforts which go into trying a way to attack them in harbour, which basically happens from after the Battle of Jutland onwards, could be pushed back a year earlier. And this all comes to consequences of choosing 13.5-inch gun ships. Because let's be honest, as good as the 12-inch HMS New Zealand was, a 13.5-inch gunship would have been, and a faster 13.5-inch gunship would have been far more of a threat at a Battle of Dogger Bank. A 13.5-inch gun HMAS Australia, is going to have an impact on, even more than the 12-inch gunship did, on German movements. We talked about all these ships, and the reality is, the strategy you choose is based on the capabilities you have. The capabilities you have is not just some arithmetical scale of, I have air defense capability, I have this level of artillery. It's, what ships do I have, and what capabilities do those ships have? What aircraft do I have, and what the capability does aircraft have? What troops do I have, and what equipment do they have? So what capabilities do they have? Capabilities are not a theoretical thing. They're not a thing you either have or don't have. They're a thing you have, conditional on you having the systems that can actually exercise them. And the reality is, whilst the Indefatigables were the natural choice if you wanted a commerce cruiser, a commerce battle cruiser, they really weren't what you choose if you wanted a first-class battle cruiser when they were being built. So that being said, and I've talked about Dogger Bank, I'd like you to think through, as a question for people in the comments to think about, I'd like you to think through what would have happened. What do you think happens after Dogger Bank? If they did have more 13.5-inch gunships, if they did have the two 15-inch 42 ships there, what happens? What do you think happens in World War One? Honestly, I think you get problems not even just in World War One. I think the treaty system is, again, a different scenario. That if Tigers are all 15-inch 42s, and you have a couple of those sitting around, that they are going to be powerful looking ships on the list, and that's going to have a long-term impact. There's some interesting history from these changes. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you liked the video, please do like, share, and subscribe. What have we got coming up? This was the year of leadership. This was what we covered in the year of leadership. It was fun. It was fun. Don't think Emperor Pertinac's video ever actually got to a point I was happy with it. None of the graphics came out decently, which annoys me. All the rest got made eventually and got put in. Some of them were delayed. But yeah, it was interesting. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you all enjoyed the video. And if you liked the video, please do share and subscribe. It really does help the channel grow. Thank you. Take care. Oh, and hope you had a good evening. This video usually comes out evening time, UK time, so I hope you had a good evening watching it.